it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Lodger came one stormy night, with eyes that shone an eerie light. His footsteps soft like whispers low, a shadow moving to and fro, of human form or something more, a riddle to the very core. He stayed until the break of dawn, and with the light was simply gone. I don't think my lodger is human. By Tosts 12. My name's Emily, and I'm 25 years old. I've recently inherited a large 3-story house from a recently deceased great-aunt, whom I'd only ever met once. The house sits on the outskirts of a small rural village named Gliston, and it's situated close to the border between England and Wales. When I first laid eyes upon the house, I was instantly in love. Its size, its shape, its colour, it just gave me all such wonderful vibes. Gliston's a lovely little village, and the villagers had been quite welcoming of my arrival as well, which made me even happier. I'd always had a bit of an affinity for the rural life. I think it's because of how different it is to living in the city. I'm originally from Swansea. The size of the house and its location next to a quintessential rural village had given me an idea that was greatly encouraged by my mother and my sister, as well as some of the villagers. Well, others not so much, but that's understandable. Well, the house had 5 bedrooms, 3 on the second floor and 2 on the third floor. Let's just say it seemed like a waste of space to only have one person living in the house. I was going to rent the rooms out to travellers and tourists. I felt like it could be a good source of income, as well as a way to boost the village's economy a little. Their own inn had shut down not too long ago. I began to advertise both the house and Gliston online. I tried to make it look and sound as warm and enticing as possible. But a few weeks passed and I received no callers, and I began to lose hope. But then, on the 13th of September, an angel finally smiled down upon me. My phone rang and I was expecting to hear the voice of my mother or something just as mundane. But instead a thick, hoarse voice came through. "Is this, the owner of the house?" My heart skipped a beat right then. I'd finally found a lodger. "Yes, this is Emily Morgan. Are you interested in renting a room?" I quickly replied. "Yes, Miss Morgan," the man answered. We discussed the usual things like when he'd be arriving, how long he'd be staying, and his rent, and so on. I decided to give him the largest bedroom in the house. It was at the end of the hallway on the third floor and had been my great-aunt's bedroom. It had a king-size bed, a spacious walk-in closet, and thick black curtains. I had wanted the room, but I decided it would be better to use to rent. I'd just taken ownership of the second biggest room instead. "Oh, by the way, what's your name?" I asked the man. "Eli Sange, but I prefer to be called by my last name. Just call me Mr. Sange." Well, I wondered why he preferred to be called by his last name. His voice did have a bit of an accent to it. Maybe it was just a culture thing. "Okay, Mr. Sange, I'll see you at 8 p.m. on Saturday." With that, the call ended. In preparation for my new lodger, I cleaned the absolute hell out of the master bedroom, as I'd come to call it now. God, I was really surprised by how dusty everything was inside of it. Saturday came and I anxiously awaited the arrival of Mr. Sange. But as the day turned to night, and as 8 soon turned to 9:30, he hadn't appeared. I waited a little longer, thinking that he might have just been delayed, but he still didn't appear. When it was around 11 that I finally gave up. I guess that he'd just lost interest and decided not to come. I mean, he could have informed me about it at least, and not left me waiting around for hours for no reason. All tired and rather ticked off, I went to bed. I was awoken by several loud bangs coming from my front door. All in my half-awake haziness, I quickly realized that it was Mr. Sange. He had come. I threw on a dressing gown and rushed down the stairs, very nearly falling in the process. I grabbed the door handle and opened the door as fast as I could. I found myself quite, taken aback at my lodger's appearance as he stood on my doorstep in a black trench coat. He was very tall. He had to be pushing 7 feet at least. His hair was quite long and scraggly, and from what I could see of his face, he was wearing a large scarf that covered his mouth and nose, and his hands, well, his skin was very pallid. His eyes were just weird looking, had this sort of jaundiced yellow hue to them and almost seemed illuminate in the dark. "Hello," Mr. Sange said in his hoarse and raspy voice. I was quickly broken out of my shocked stupor and realized just how rude I was being. Well, I guess he must have had some kind of genetic disorder, probably gigantism. I smiled and then replied, "Oh, hello, Mr. Sange. I didn't expect you to come so late." He just chuckled, and to be honest, with his voice, it actually kind of creeped me out. "Sorry for my thoroughly late arrival. I had some matters to attend to, and they took quite a while," Sange said. I noticed that he didn't have any luggage with him. All he had was a large, full-looking black bag. Maybe he had his clothes inside. "Well, I'm sure you want to see your room." I grinned, eager to see what he thought of it and the extensive work I'd done in it. As he came in through the door, I was suddenly hit by this wave of coldness. God, it was cold outside for September. I quickly shut the door, but it didn't do much to dissipate the cold. I'd have to check the boiler tomorrow. I led Sange upstairs. As we walked down the hallway to his room, I felt tiny next to him. I barely came up to his chest. With a slight grin, I opened the door, and much to my excitement, his eyes lit up. He stepped into the room and said, "This is perfect." "I'm glad you like it. Well, it took me ages to wash everything," I jokingly grumbled as I went in after him. "You've done a great job," he replied, giving the room a look over. Much to my relief, he seemed to like his room. He seemed very smitten with it, in fact. It was actually kind of endearing. He opened the closet and placed the large bag inside of it. He then opened the black bag and reached inside. He took out a small bottle of what looked like wine and then presented it to me. I noticed how long his fingernails were. God, they looked almost like claws. "As a thank you for allowing me to stay here, I thought I'd bring you a gift." I smiled broadly and accepted his gift. It was very thoughtful of him to do this. I wasn't a big fan of alcohol, but seeing as it was a gift, I'd drink this one. "Thank you, Sange. Thank you for choosing to stay here."
"Is there anybody else lodging here?"
he asked as he sat down on the bed. I shook my head. "No, you're the only one who's answered my ads." He shrugged and then said,
"I'm sure you'll get another call."
I smiled and nodded. "Okay then, Sange. I guess I'll leave you to it. If you need anything else, just give my bedroom door a knock. It's the door closest to the stairs on the 2nd floor." Well, I was eager as hell to hop back into bed, but decided to give the wine Sange had given me a try first. It was very strong and had a strange aftertaste to it. It was sweet, though. Maybe I'd give it another swig in the morning. I awoke the next day with a pulsating headache, and I was further dismayed when I saw that it was raining outside. I was hoping to take Sange on a little guided tour of Gliston today. Well, I didn't think I'd bother now. As I got out of bed, I noticed that the coldness from last night was still lingering around. I felt the radiator, but it seemed to be working just fine. I must have accidentally left a window open somewhere, or maybe Sange did. I went to the bedroom, took a paracetamol, and then got dressed. I went up to Sange's room to see how he was doing, but I received no answer when I knocked. He'd arrived pretty late last night, so he must have been knackered, so I thought I'd just let him sleep in. I was going to pop into the village to stock up a bit on groceries. When I stepped out onto my porch, I saw something on the grass a few feet away from my house. It was a dead cat, and its head had been torn off. God, I felt like vomiting. A damn fox must have attacked it or something. I'd have to talk to the village council about having it removed from my property. While in town, I thought I'd pay my friend Darcy a visit. She owned a small flower shop near the entrance of the town and was probably eager to hear about my new lodger. She always was one for gossip. As I entered the shop, I could tell by the look in her eyes that she had news for me. Guess what, Em? Your lodger came in here today. Sange is his name, isn't it? Had he? I wondered what time he'd gotten up. It was only 8:30, I thought to myself. He's quite, different looking, isn't he, Emily? He actually made me jump when I saw him come through the door. Not to be rude to him or anything, she said with mild embarrassment. I think he might have a genetic disorder. He seems a pretty nice guy, though. You know what he did last night? Gave me a bottle of wine to say thanks for allowing him lodging, I replied. Well, yeah, he does seem nice. We talked for a bit about the flower species I have in here. You seem quite taken with those red roses over there. Darcy gestured to the roses. I thought of buying them for Sange to say thanks for giving me that wine last night. Darcy then giggled a little and said, I think he thought I was pretty. He asked me if I lived alone. Okay, that was a weird thing to ask someone you'd just met. I could chalk it down to just simple small talk, and, well, Darcy did tend to have a habit of exaggerating things. Sange seemed like a nice bloke. He looked a little weird, yes, but he didn't come off to me as the psycho creep type. Do you know what, Darcy? I think I'll buy those roses for Sange, I said. Darcy gave me a playful smirk and said, Oh, interested in him, are you? I turned bright red and quickly retorted with, What? No, it's just a matter of courtesy. She giggled and replied, Relax, I'm just teasing you. Here, let me get you a bag. I returned home, trying to avoid looking at the dead cat, and after packing away the groceries, headed back up to Sange's room. Hopefully he'd arrived back by now. Well, if not, I'd leave the roses on the bed with a note, and hopefully he wouldn't take it the wrong way. I knocked on his door, and much to my relief, he opened it. I noticed that he was still wearing the trench coat, and he still had that large scarf wrapped around his face. I presented the roses to him and said, Darcy told me about you popping into her shop and how you like these roses, so I thought I'd buy them for you to say thanks. He accepted the roses and replied, That was very thoughtful of you, Emily. Thank you very much. She's a nice woman, that Darcy. I chuckled a little and then said, Yeah, she's really talkative and she loves meeting new people. She was the first friend I made when I moved here. Sange caressed one of the crimson petals before saying, I thought I'd take a look around the town before things got busy. I don't like being out in crowds much. I tend to turn a few heads and... I didn't scare you last night, did I? I noticed Darcy jumped a little when I went in her shop. Oh, he was self-conscious. Oh, poor guy. No, you don't frighten me or anything. I'm just a bit shy as all when I'm meeting new people. Don't worry about Darcy too. She seems to have taken a liking to you. She'd love to see you in there again, I replied, trying to soothe his anxiety. Yes, I think I'll give her another visit. By the way, if you're curious about my scarf, it's just I have a deformity that affects my mouth and my nose. I don't like being looked at, Sange replied. So that was why he still had this scarf on. It's okay, Sange. If it makes you more comfortable, it's perfectly fine with me, I replied. He nodded. Thank you for the roses, Emily. I'm afraid I'll have to leave you now. I have some unpacking to do. I'll see you later. Remember, if you need anything, just give me a call. With that, Sange shut the door. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful, save for a news report I watched about a taxi driver's mutilated body being found dumped in a woodland that borders Gliston to the west. His throat had been slit open and his wrists had been punctured with a sharp object. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. The fact that a murder as brutal as this would happen so close to a little village like Gliston was honestly pretty harrowing. I heard Sage coming down the stairs, and I was quick to inform him of the murder. He sat down beside me, quietly watching the report. Looks like the killer only went for the arteries. Geez, hope it's not one of those vampire serial killers like Richard Chase, I said. Sage, his eyes fixed solely to the television, replied,
Yes, it very well could be.
I asked Sage if he wanted dinner, but he politely refused, saying that he'd already eaten. He hadn't come back out of his room after hearing the news report. Well, I just hoped it hadn't spooked him into leaving. Later on, I just messed around on my phone for a little while in my room. I also decided to take a few more swigs of that wine Sage had given me. But to be honest, it actually started to grow on me a little too much, in fact. I started feeling very groggy and just decided to call it a night. I was asleep for maybe 2 hours before being woken up by a loud thump outside my bedroom window. In my hazy half-sleep state, I got out of bed and approached the window to see just what it was. Through the rain-swept glass, I saw a large shape crouched on the grass outside. This shape then suddenly darted off at considerable speed and disappeared into the darkness. I woke up the next day with another headache. It was still raining outside, which just dampened my mood even more, and to make matters worse, that coldness was still lingering about. After showering and getting dressed, and taking 2 paracetamols, I had breakfast and was ready to head into the village. However, when I stepped into the hallway, the front door opened and Sage came in. I noticed he had his hand around his mouth, well, around the scarf covering his mouth, really. "Good morning, Sage," I greeted. He just replied with a quick yes, and then rather briskly went up the stairs. After doing some shopping, I went to visit Darcy, and when I entered her shop, I was shocked by the state she was in. Her skin was a sickly pale, and her eyes were dark and baggy. Her normally vibrant and pleasant face was also gone, to be replaced by a tired and listless look. "Are you all right, Darce?" I asked her. I feel awful, Em. I would have taken the day off, but I have no one to cover for me," she said, her voice scratchy and painful sounding. God, I'd never seen Darcy like this. She'd seemed perfectly fine yesterday. She was a normal, talkative and bubbly self. "Do you have a cold? Well, Darcy, you should take the day off. I mean, I'll cover for you if you want," I said. Darcy just smiled and then replied, "Em, thanks for the offer, but you don't know one thing about running a shop." "Okay, that is true, but Darcy, look at the state of you. You need some rest. You shouldn't be straining yourself," I urged her. She seemed to consider this and then said, "You're right, Em. I don't think it'll hurt to close the shop down for a day. I don't have any important orders or anything." Darcy then said, "Oh, by the way, I had this really weird dream last night. I was just laying in bed and my window started to open by itself. And I saw these very bright yellow eyes kind of hovering over my bed, and then, well, I just woke up right after." "You must have been having sleep paralysis," I replied. "It definitely sounded like it." "Yeah, might have," Darcy replied, before putting on her coat. I walked Darcy to her house and made sure she'd gone to bed. I went home afterwards and thought I'd check up on Sage and tell him about Darcy not feeling well. If he didn't know already, he might have visited her. I went up to his room and found the door partly open. I knocked before entering and quickly noticed a few droplets of blood on the wooden floor. So that's why he'd rushed up the stairs earlier. He must have had a nosebleed, or maybe he'd cut himself. He should have told me. I would have helped him with it. We also found his scarf on the nightstand. I picked it up and grimaced when I noticed just how soaked it was in blood. God, he must have really cut himself. I heard him coming down the hallway, and when he came into the room, he had a towel wrapped around his lower face. The towel, too, had blood on it. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes, I'm fine. I just had a nosebleed," he replied, and then took his scarf from me. "Sage, that scarf's covered in blood and that towel is too. Do you want me to look at it? I have a first aid kit. He held up his hands and shook his head.
No, it's okay, Emily. Don't worry. I have chronic nosebleeds sometimes. It's happened since I was a boy.
He didn't seem all that bothered by it, so I guess it probably was nothing to worry about. Still, though, there was quite a lot of blood on that scarf and the towel.
Oh, I saw Darcy earlier as well. She isn't feeling well, is she?
He said. She looks like she's caught a hell of a cold. I told her just to close the shop for a day and go rest at home, I replied.
She's probably caught a fever. It's been rather cold and wet lately,
he replied. He put his scarf on the bed and then said,
I need to go wash up. I'll see you later,
before ushering me out of his room. Once the door was closed, I heard this very weird noise. It was like a hissing groan, followed by a lapping sound. Later on, I was on the sofa watching television, though my mind was somewhere else. I wondered why Darcy hadn't told me about Sange's visit. Even if she was feeling tired, she would have at least mentioned it. I was also wondering about just where that weird noise had come from earlier. Darcy's mention of her dream had also made me remember what had happened last night. I'd seen something outside my bedroom window. It looked way too big to be a cat or a fox. Maybe it was an escaped dog or something. It could have also been a hallucination. That wine Sange had given me was some pretty potent stuff. It had full on knocked me out for a bit last night. The rain had begun to weaken a bit outside, so I thought I'd take a quick walk around the garden. The garden, much like the house, was very spacious. It was rather overgrown, but nothing a bit of trimming and mowing wouldn't sort out. There was a large pond in the center of it, and a large hedge surrounded the borders of the garden. Growing out of this hedge were a few tall and very majestic-looking conifers. I'd have to show Sange the garden. He seemed to like plants if his visits to Darcy's shop were any indication. As I looked at one of the conifers, I noticed just how many bats were roosting in its branches. There were dozens of them. I could see some of them crawling on the bark and even biting at each other, probably to get the best spots. It was honestly making my skin crawl. Then I felt a shadow fall over me, and almost jumped when I saw Sange behind me. He was staring at the bats, almost mesmerized by them.
Oh, enchanting little creatures, aren't they?
He said. They look kind of cute when they're alone, but they remind me of rats when they're clustered together like that, I replied. The bats had quieted now and seemed to have all entered a peaceful slumber. Sange continued to gaze fondly at them. Oh, nippy out here. I'm going back inside, I said, feeling the rain start to become heavier again. Are you coming? I asked Sange.
In a minute,
he replied. Just don't stay out here too long. Looks like it's going to start tipping down again, I called to him as I headed back inside. 2 hours later, I was in my bedroom filing my nails down. I hadn't noticed just how long they'd gotten. I'd been pretty busy though, with being a host and all, so I hadn't had much time for personal grooming. Sange really needed to cut his nails though, and I didn't want to sound rude by mentioning it to him. Come to think of it, I didn't think he'd taken a shower or a bath since he'd come here. I think the only time he'd washed himself was earlier, when he'd had that nosebleed. He hasn't changed his clothes either. He's still wearing that trench coat, but perhaps he just has 2 pairs of the same color. Also, I did notice that he was wearing a different scarf outside just now. I jumped when I heard a loud boom of thunder outside, followed by a bright flash of lightning. I like watching thunderbolts, so I went over to my room. Another flash of lightning revealed dozens of bats fluttering outside my window, likely the ones that were roosting in the tree in the back garden. I wondered where they'd come from. I hadn't seen them the night before, nor had I ever noticed them in the garden either. Or maybe they were migratory or something. Unsettlingly large bats suddenly came into my view. I noticed how the other bats parted as it flew past them, almost in a reverent way. It must have been the alpha of the colony. This alpha bat flew in a very fast and almost frenzied manner, as if it were rushing for something. After another lightning flash, it had, completely disappeared. I wondered if Sage liked watching them too. I felt like hell when I woke up. I must have caught whatever Darcy had. Did she sneeze quite close to me yesterday? After I'd showered, I'd go visit her. Hopefully she was feeling a little better today. After finishing my shower, I entered the kitchen and found a bowl of cereal on the table and a glass of what looked to be orange juice. Sage must have made it for me. That was nice of him. Maybe he'd gone out on one of his walks again. After eating breakfast, I braved the rain. It was even heavier today. I went over to Darcy's house. I entered and announced my arrival, but Darcy didn't respond. "Darcy," I called to her as I ascended the staircase. I opened the bedroom door, expecting to find her asleep. I thought she was at first, but as I drew closer, I saw just how pale she'd become. There was virtually no colour to her skin at all. She was just completely pallid and her eyes had darkened considerably. I shook her, but she remained completely still. I shook her again and loudly said, "Darcy!" But still she didn't respond. Hesitantly, I put my shaking fingers against her neck and I felt no pulse. I phoned for an ambulance right away, and when the medics arrived, they discovered that Darcy had died of massive blood loss. There was absolutely no blood left in her body at all. They'd found puncture marks on both her wrists and the right side of her neck, very similar to the body that had been discovered in the woods a few days ago. The police soon arrived to investigate. They'd found no signs of forced entry into Darcy's home, nor had they found any sign of a struggle. But the marks found on Darcy were more than enough to confirm that she was another victim of this vampiric killer, as the papers had so called them. One of the officers, PC Rhys Jacobs, I think his name was, asked me about Sage. Apparently some of the villagers claimed to have spotted him wandering around Gliston late at night or very early in the morning. I informed Jacobs that Sage did like to go for walks around the village at those times, well, early in the mornings at least. I didn't know if he was going for walks at night as well. I also informed Jacobs that Sage was friendly with Darcy, but I didn't notice any signs of aggression from him, and that, despite being somewhat eccentric, he seemed like a fairly friendly man. He'd been kind to me at least, and Darcy had nothing bad to say about him. Either way though, PC Jacobs had claimed that many of the villagers had felt intimidated by him. Apparently one older couple had claimed that they'd seen him climbing up a wall and onto a roof, which I didn't believe in the slightest. The guy was way too big to be nimble enough to pull off a feat like that. PC Jacobs, however, did tell me that Sage would likely have to be brought in for questioning at some point, and that I should inform him of it when I saw him again. After everything that happened at Darcy's house, her body, the ambulance and the police, I'd just hidden away in my room for the rest of the day. It had all happened so fast and completely came out of nowhere. God, the image of Darcy's body was burned into my mind. This was a person I'd known who had been my close friend, or my only real friend in this village. Even if I'd only known her for a year, it didn't change that fact at all. And now I was never going to see her again. Jeez, I couldn't even imagine what her family was going through right now. I'd met her parents once, and they were some of the kindest, most welcoming people I'd ever been so fortunate to meet. I couldn't imagine the looks on their faces when they were informed that their daughter was dead, and had likely been murdered. I hope whoever had done this to Darcy, as well as that poor taxi driver who'd just been dumped like a slaughtered pig in the woods, would rot, just rot. In prison or in hell, I didn't care which. And to make matters worse, Sage was likely going to get blamed for it. That poor man, who was likely going to be terrorized just for his appearance and the fact he was an outsider. I knew those villagers had never liked him, or me for that matter. Sure, they'd put on a kind face whenever I was around, but every now and then I'd see a quick glimpse of an ugly look or hear a hateful mutter. And Darcy would always tell me when she'd heard the other townsfolk gossip about me. I just laughed it off, thinking it would just fade away as they got to know me, but it never did. When I announced my idea to turn my aunt's house into an inn, I heard rumours stating that I was lying and was instead going to turn it into a brothel, or that I was going to wreck their quaint little village with tourism. Some had been more accepting, yes, but even then I felt like I was being greedy and selfish. I had been so blind, but now I'd seen things for how they were. Collapsed onto my pillow and listened to rain pelting violently against my window. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and noticed just how pale I was and how long my nails had gotten again. Right now, though, I didn't really care. At all. I heard my door open slowly, and Sange stuck his head into my room.
"I've heard the news, Emily,"
he said to me quietly. "You can come in if you want," I said, and he quickly obliged. He shut my door and approached my bed. I shifted to the side so that he could sit down, and when he did, I hugged him. I just felt so crushingly alone right now that I just needed someone. Sange put his hand on my head and began to stroke my dark hair. I'd never noticed just how cold he was, but at this point I just didn't care at all. He sighed and then said,
"When it comes out of nowhere to seize you, death is terrifying. But as it is, death is a part of the world, a part of nature, a part of life. Life and death are in many ways intertwined, and both are important."
He went quiet for a second, and as I looked into his yellow eyes, it seemed like he was staring into his own mind.
"As a matter of fact, Emily, I believe a greater cruelty, a greater hell would be the inability to be taken by death. The state of immortality, if you will. Time is not kind, and much like death and life, it is inevitable. Within its relentlessly gnashing maw, there lies constantly swallowing oceans, whose depths are endless and dark. Atop these oceans and their swirling waves are islands of ever-burning fire that render whatever touches them cold. Everyone, every single person you know, your loved ones, your acquaintances, they will all fall to time, no matter how tightly you try to hold on to them. Their faces will fade and be lost to the waters and the fires of time's abyssal maws, and eventually you, yourself, shall fall to its relentless pursuit as well. Every single part of you will fade, your memories, your personality, your appearance. Every single thing that makes you, you, will fade and turn to ash. Until you're nothing more than an empty, shambling, lifeless husk driven only by empty and primal instinct, having completely lost every single thing that was you and belonged to you. Death, in many ways, does not separate one into a lonely abyss. Like life, it connects. It connects one to everyone, and you'll never have to suffer the waking nightmare of forgetting."
I sat there, letting every single word sink into and seed within my mind. Those words, they were so strange and yet comforting at the same time.
"Here,"
he said, picking up a bottle of wine.
"Drink some more of this. It'll help soothe your mind."
"Thank you, Sange," I said quietly as I took the bottle from him. I took a few sips and started to feel lightheaded. I lay down on my bed again and Sange patted my head before exiting my room. And then I fell to the grasp of sleep. I'd awoken at about 5 a.m. My head felt like shattered glass was inside of it, and I was freezing despite being under the covers. I could hear lightning outside, and my window was absolutely drenched in rain. I got out of bed, not really feeling like going back to sleep. The only thing on my mind right now was getting rid of this nasty headache. I went upstairs to the bathroom and took a paracetamol, which barely even did anything. The events that had happened yesterday came back to me, and I just started to feel even worse. Darcy was dead, and I was pretty much alone in this village now, well, except for Sange. His soothing words last night had really helped me out of my slump. I was still sad, yes, but now I just felt a little better. I went back upstairs to check on him. I knocked on his door and entered, and
found his room empty. The bed had been done, and so perfectly that it was honestly looking like it had never been slept in. He'd placed the roses I'd bought him on the nightstand, but they had now begun to wilt, and their vibrant crimson had now faded to a dull, lifeless brown. I thought he must have gone out on another one of his early morning walks. Then I noticed this very earthy smell coming from the walk-in closet. I took hold of the handle and slowly opened the closet, and my blood ran cold at the sight in front of me. The floor was absolutely covered in earth, and I could see worms wriggling about inside of it. There were blood spatters on the wall of the closet as well. Fresh blood, in fact. "Emily." I heard Sange's voice come from behind me, and he wasn't wearing the scarf anymore. His nose was just two thin slits in the middle of his face, and his mouth, dear God, his mouth. It was so wide it almost seemed to split his face in two, and when he opened his mouth to speak again, I saw rows of yellow, jagged fangs. "Sange?" I couldn't even speak. I couldn't even believe what was happening right now. Sange just smiled and said, "Well, Emily, I haven't been entirely truthful with you, and I apologize for that. I'm sorry for the mess I've made of your closet, and I am sorry about Darcy." Darcy? What the hell did he mean? Just what the hell was he? He seemed to read my expression and then said, "Yes, as you can see, Emily, I am what you would call a Nikuratu. I should have told you when I first came here, but I just didn't want to alarm you." "You're a vampire?" I was in complete disbelief, but now that I thought back on it, it all made sense. His pale skin, his claw-like nails, his inhuman height, and his damn eyes. "Yes, that is another word for my kind." He chuckled and then said, "And you know that taxi driver and Darcy. Yes, it was me who killed them. But let me explain. That taxi driver was a drug-dealing lout, and you know Darcy? She had bone cancer. I smelt it on her." God, I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. Were the words that he'd told me last night a big, huge lie too? You killed Darcy." "Look, Emily, it was a mercy killing. She was going to die anyway, and I can assure you that it was done out of kindness." I started to cry. I felt like screaming, just screaming at this monster that I thought had been a good friend. I felt his shadow fall over me and his hand rest on my shoulder, but I just slapped it away. I didn't want him anywhere near me. Had his killing of Darcy really been out of mercy, or was this just another lie to manipulate me, for him to keep his facade? "I know this may be difficult for you to accept, but I can assure you that I had the best intentions," he said gently to me, but that was soon followed by a dark chuckle. And that chuckle soon turned into a horrendous laugh that barely even sounded human anymore. "You really are gullible, you know that. Oh, I have a deformity. Oh, I don't like going out into crowds," he mockingly hissed. Clenching my teeth, I launched myself at him with speed I didn't even know I had, and grabbed hold of the vase that held the roses I'd given to him. I slammed it into his face, and he didn't even react to it. He grabbed me by the neck and tossed me across the room. I hit the wall hard and collapsed onto my aunt's dressing drawer. I fell to the floor, surrounded by old clothes and ancient pieces of jewelry. I was completely winded. I felt Sange's claws digging into my arm as he began to lift me from the floor. I grasped at the floor, trying to find anything to use as a weapon until finally I grasped a silver pendant. As he brought me up to eye level, I slammed the pendant into his forehead. I heard a disgusting sizzling sound, and Sage let loose an ear-shattering roar of pain before dropping me to the ground and rushing into the darkness of the hallway outside. Gasping, I pulled myself to my feet and placed the pendant around my neck. I looked around the room for another weapon, until my eyes fell upon the curtain pole. It was silver and pointed at both ends. I tore it from the wall and shakily went out into the hallway. I tried to turn on the light, but quickly realized that the bulb had been torn from the socket. I heard someone knocking at the front door, and I rushed to open it, but Sage did it before me. I heard the police officer scream, and Sage let loose an unholy bellow before everything became eerily quiet. Slowly I descended the stairs until I was on the second floor and then approached the stairway to the first floor. The front door was covered in blood. What Sage had done to that poor man, I had no idea. Quietly, I stepped into the hallway, accompanied by a loud crack of thunder. I stepped into the living room first, and then into the kitchen. I thought to just run out of the front door to get help, but then realized how stupid that would be. No one would ever believe me. I stepped out into the garden, and the flash of lightning revealed to me the body of the police officer. He'd been impaled on the fence that separated the patio from the rest of the garden. He almost vomited at the sight, but didn't have time to, as I saw dozens of bats suddenly erupt from the tree in the hedge and begin speeding towards me. I quickly ran back into the house and locked the door behind me, but not before one of the bats, the biggest one at that, flew in past me. It landed on the table, and then it grinned at me. It didn't take me long to realize that it was Sage. Before my very eyes, he grotesquely shifted into his true form. I held the curtain pole defensively in front of me, and he just laughed. "Are you going to try and stake me?" he grinned. I charged at him, but he leapt from the table and tore through the ceiling into the room above. I ran from the kitchen into the stairs. He'd broken into one of the guest rooms, but appeared to have left when I got there. I heard a noise from the closet, and seemingly on instinct, I plunged the curtain pole into it. And then I felt Sage's claws rake across my back. I let out a pained yell as I fell face first to the floor. Sage grabbed me and turned me onto my back, but he let out a frightened hiss and backed away then, when he saw the silver pendant and retreated back into the hallway. Groaning, I struggled back to my feet. I grasped the curtain pole and pulled it free of the closet. I could feel the blood trickling down my back as I limped out into the hallway. I held onto the wall for support and followed the trail of destruction that Sage had left in his escape. I followed it to his room, but when I entered it, he was nowhere in sight. As I looked, I felt something drop onto my head and then trickle down my face. It was blood. I heard a dry laugh above me and looked up to see Sage clinging to the ceiling like a spider. He then grabbed me by the hair, hoisted me from the floor, and flung me into the wall. Even as I hit it, I didn't let go of my makeshift spear. He then dropped to the floor and towered above. "I'm surprised it took you this long to realize just what I was. I actually found it rather cute, just how kind and accepting you were. And that Darcy, all I needed to do was just compliment her, and I had her wrapped around my finger." His grin widened, blood dripping from his fangs as he said, "You know, I was really considering leaving you alone. I actually somewhat liked you, but, well, things are past that point now." I glared daggers at him and then thrust the pole upwards. His eyes widened as it pierced his chest, and he let out an echoing howl. He backed away from me, took hold of the pole, and started to try and wrench it free. But I rushed forward, grabbed the other end of the pole, and shoved it forward. He gasped as it burst out of his back. Sage still pulled at it, trying to tear it out of himself. He backed away until he tripped over a fallen bottle and then slammed through the window. A loud crackle of thunder accompanied his descent to the ground below. I stared at the broken window for a few seconds, and then I fell to the floor and blacked out. I woke on the floor of Sage's room, surrounded by clutter. My chest felt very sore. It must have been the silver pendant rubbing against my skin, so I took it off and noticed how hot it felt in my hand. I tossed it away and walked over to the window. It was still dark out, and I noticed a pile of ash on the grass below. It seemed like that curtain pole had done the job and annihilated that demon. I'd be lying, though, if I said I didn't feel betrayed. I thought Sange was a good person. I thought we'd actually become friends, but now I realized just how empty his words were in my room last night. They were just not so sweet nothings, to manipulate me away from the fact that he was a bloodthirsty monster who was killing people. I watched silently as the wind stirred the ashes and then carried them away, to disappear into the stormy sky. Looking away from my window, I felt where Sange had clawed me on the back, but I felt nothing. My skin was smooth and unbroken, as if it had never happened. In fact, as I looked down at my hands, I noticed just how pale I'd gone. When I felt my teeth with my tongue, they were all sharp. Slowly I turned to look at the mirror on the other side of the room, and I wasn't there at all.
So, my dear friends, yep, it happened again. Somebody claimed my background music as their own and put in a copyright claim on this. Well, to try and get the money from this video, I think, or whatever it is. Anyway, yeah, so this is a remastered, re-recorded, edited, whatever you want to say, story from about 3 years ago. I just refuse to let people get away with this kind of nonsense, especially as I actually create the music myself. It's not like I'm using something that's just out there generally available. Anyway, so yeah, so this was a revised version of one that I did a while back. So if you heard it before, sorry. Well, I thought it was a really good one. Sometimes I was like, oh, should I bother doing these updates? But this one really was a good one, so I enjoyed it. Well, that is enough for this evening. Back again very soon. Till next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.